By January of 1951, the Chinese had pushed United Nations forces back to the drawing board with a frightening display of manpower. But they were quickly running out of steam. They were overextended and in dire need of supplies. They wouldn't be able to sustain an offensive much longer. Commander Ridgway was confident the days of retreat would soon be over.
I find it difficult to understand the motives of the Chinese Communist leaders in continuing their aggression. Surely by now it must be clear to them beyond any shadow of doubt that they are incapable with their own resources of destroying the United Nations forces in Korea or of driving them into the sea, as they continue to boast they will.
The general launched a task force named Operation Wolfhound to investigate the communist weakness. It set out north in the direction of Seoul. The team made it all the way to Suwon, halfway back to the capital, before it found any strong Chinese force. Air Force pilots overhead reported that the enemy was moving north instead of south. The abrupt turnaround was mysterious. Ridgway decided the time was right for a full-scale offensive. He commissioned an operation designed to push the Chinese back to Seoul and beyond. On January 25th, Operation Thunderbolt was unleashed. The troops charged forward and sent the communists scrambling for cover. Within days, they recaptured Incheon and Kimpo airfield, taking both without a struggle. By February, the men found themselves looking triumphantly across the Han at Seoul, as they had 5 months earlier. No one could explain the sudden reversal of fortune, but General Ridgway was determined to do all he could to exploit it. His battle strategy recalled Napoleon's famous command, "Never mind towns, bring me prisoners." Ridgway was more concerned with destroying the Chinese army than with regaining territory. Under his watch, Korea would become a showdown between expendable UN firepower and expendable Chinese manpower. But neither could compete with the wrath of Mother Nature. In February, mud from heavy rains blanketed central Korea. Both sides were stuck in the quagmire. The weather stalled the UN advance, but the Chinese were crippled by it. Their supply lines were racked from above by Mother Nature and the American Air Force, and they were dangerously malnourished. As the famous military saying goes, an army marches on its stomach. And with chow always on hand, UN stomachs were satisfied. UN spirits were high, thanks in part to a new 5-day R&R program that gave them a vacation from the front. GIs were shipped off in groups to Japan, where they took full advantage of their mini vacations, treating themselves to great food, lots of sleep, booze, and girls. It was just what the men needed to recharge their batteries for a renewed offensive. Back on the peninsula, USO shows kept the troops smiling and singing between battles. By March 15, 1951, the rejuvenated forces gnawed their way back within striking distance of the 38th parallel, all the way to Seoul's doorstep. They bombarded the city limits with heavy artillery and pried the communists from the city once again. There was no celebration this time. After 4 invasions, Seoul was in shambles. It was business as usual. UN forces pressed on and reached the 38th parallel by the end of March. It had been 6 months since the first invasion of North Korea, and again there was a debate over how far this offensive should go. This time, President Truman wanted a settlement. As he saw it, the first attempt at uniting Korea had proven to be a mistake, and a second attempt would only waste more American lives. MacArthur had a different view. He insisted that the campaign against China be widened to include blockades of its coast and airstrikes on the Chinese mainland. Truman had had enough. He announced to the world that he was firing General MacArthur.
It is with the deepest personal regret that I found myself compelled to take this action. General MacArthur is one of our greatest military commanders. But the cause of world peace is much more important than any individual.
It was a shocking development and sent Truman's popularity into a tailspin. Meanwhile, MacArthur came home to a hero's welcome. He concluded his lifelong quest for immortality with a speech to a joint session of Congress.
Old soldiers never die. They just fade away. I now close my military career and just fade away. An old soldier who tried to do his duty as God gave him the light to see that duty. Goodbye.
With Big Mac gone, the war went on without him. General Ridgway took over the Far East Command, and General James Van Fleet was called in to replace him as field commander. Van Fleet was the consummate soldier. A colonel at Normandy and a staunch anti-communist, he demanded an enormous increase in ammunition so his forces would expend fire and steel, not men. As the UN arsenal expanded, the communist lines contracted. On the map, their retreat looked like a massive withdrawal. But air surveillance reports suggested the Chinese were recoiling for a massive second wave of attacks. When they came, the UN would be ready